Hello and welcome to UKEdChat After Hours. I'm Martin. If you want to find out more about me, you can go to my Twitter handle, which is ICTMagic. If you want to find out more about UKEdChat, you can go to our website at UKEdChat.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at UKEdChat. Now, tonight we're talking about workload. We've just had the Twitter discussion and also a Twitter Spaces. And we've had some really interesting points. And it seems that after many decades of this being a problem in schools and also in other professions as well, of course, workload continues to be an issue. So after all this time, it still seems to be something which we haven't quite got to grips with yet. So I'm interviewing a very I'm trying to think of the word, an expert on this who can tell me a little bit about workload. And obviously I've been overworking because I can't think of my words now. But special guest, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thanks, Martin. Hi, I'm Vanessa Weirs, and I'm a cognitive behaviour coach. And what that means is I work in schools with usually senior leaders, focusing on how they can manage their workload, because in many cases you can't take responsibility for how the job is, but you can take responsibility for how you approach the job, and that's what I coach leaders on. So my website is rightcoach, www.rightcoach.co.uk, and I'm on Twitter at Vanessa Weirs.
Okay, and all of those links will be in our show notes, which should be wherever you're watching this. You should be able to find a link to those. It is on UKEdChat.com if you want to find that now. So this is an interactive session, so if you do have questions for Vanessa or myself for that matter, then you can ask them. All you need to do is just use the UKEdChat hashtag on Twitter, and you should be able to put your questions there. If you're watching the repeat of this, then again, if you just reply wherever you're watching this, whether it's on YouTube, Twitter, or elsewhere, then put your comment in wherever you have the ability to do so, and we will get our questions to Vanessa. So we're talking about workload. We've been talking about this on Twitter, and it was quite striking how many people had things to say about this. It was actually one of our most popular chats in quite a while, I have to say. So obviously it is touching lots of people. So perhaps I can start by talking about a little bit of my own experience, because I am very much a person with one of these very long to-do lists. I try not to shout about it, but I know some people do. So before this discussion, we talked a little bit about the idea of a to-do list martyr or a workload martyr. Could you maybe unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, definitely. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I have got some notes because I'm very nervous and I don't want my mind to go blank and we have nothing to say.
That's absolutely
now, this idea of martyr culture. So I've been reading a book called Unwinding Anxiety, and it's about unwinding anxiety because so many people are anxious. And the doctor who wrote it actually wrote it for medics, and he wrote it with an app, and he said he knew he had to make the solution something that people could put into place in their jobs, because the medics would not take time out to look after themselves or go to an appointment to discuss their anxiety when there were people in more need than they were, in their opinion. So I don't think it's something that's limited to education. I think it's also not something that most people, in my opinion, go out of their way to be. I think it's something that they might be, but it's not, because that's not the goal. I think it could be that they believe they should be doing it for whatever that reason is, maybe for the students, for the school, for their careers. So they've done their best, so they don't feel guilty. But the result is they then do too much work and then talk about this work all the time.
Yeah, and I think it's perhaps difficult for us to actually gauge how much workload we actually should be doing in school, because maybe we have an idea of how much we need to do our jobs, but actually is that enough to perhaps satisfy our colleagues from a distance? And is that kind of culture healthy. It's probably not. So can I ask you about supporting colleagues? What kind of support should we be putting in for colleagues who perhaps maybe are overdoing it in the classroom for whatever reason, whether it's, as we've discussed, they're trying to emulate those people who seem to be incredibly busy, or maybe just because they're new to profession, or perhaps they're struggling for other reasons. How can we support colleagues who are perhaps overdoing it?
I think the big challenge for people, and I include me in this, is accepting that it can't all be done, whatever it is, and supporting each other to work towards living with that reality is really helpful. So how could you help yourself live with that reality? So if, for example, you've got a to-do list and you think that everything on that to-do list needs doing by me this week. Okay. So let's collect some evidence and see if that's true. So say next week, you write your to-do list as normal. At the end of the week, you count how many things are on your to-do list and how many things you didn't do. Then you do that for 3 weeks. So in front of you, you've now got some evidence. So that idea, everything needs doing by me this week. Well, I'm guessing the evidence will show you that that's not true. Those 5 things from your list fell off your to-do list. Now, would it be different if you took those 5 things off the list at the beginning of the week and made a choice so that they weren't haunting you all week, but you were more in control? But people seem to feel differently about them falling off the list at the end of the week than if they took them off at the beginning of the week, because that means they're choosing not to do them. If they don't get to them, that feels like it's not a choice. But in fact, it is a choice because you've chosen to do other things. But what that will help you do is face the reality that you can't do it all, whatever it is. It's just not possible. And we have to support each other to face the trade-off instead of kind of perpetuating the myth that if you work hard enough, if you're good enough, if you have less sleep, if you get up early enough, then you can do it all, because it's just not true. But we all have to find that reality for ourselves.
Yeah, and we had a similar comment on our Twitter Spaces as well. The idea that burnout happens if you try to do everything. And one of the people who were speaking on the Twitter Spaces said that they learned very early on the fact that they had to prioritize what they were doing and put those things aside which were simply above and beyond, frankly, what they were supposed to be doing in class. Now, it's obviously very nice to be able to go above and beyond, but if it means that actually you're not getting the core responsibilities done within the classroom because of burnout or whatever it may be, and this gentleman was saying that if it wasn't for that, his 20-year career would have been a lot shorter than it is. And I know there was research a couple of years ago that said that most teachers actually don't survive 5 years in a profession. I don't know what the research says these days, but perhaps 5 years ago that was certainly the case. So are there particular elements of classroom practice? So for myself, I know that email is an issue. Are there particular areas of what we are required to do as a teacher which cause particular stress, particular anxiety, and perhaps particular problems within our to-do lists?
Yeah, I think so. And at the beginning, I'd said kind of you can't take responsibility for how the job is, but you can take responsibility for how you approach the job. That's not all true. So, for example, if we look at marking and feedback, it's a big workload issue. That is something that the school can do something about. So to say we have to mark, that's just how life is, find a way to manage it, isn't a solution. We can work together to find a way that means people can mark effectively, students can get good feedback, and people can have a life. It's not failing to want a life outside of your role, and it actually makes you better at your role. So it's like having a work-life balance is essential to doing a good job. It's not a detriment to doing a good job. So I was talking to one school this week doing the school mental health award. So it wasn't a coaching session, so I can talk about it, a one-to-one coaching session in that respect. And they were trialling something with marking, so that they looked at the reasons. Why are we marking? What do we want to know from it? And they are trialing doing some sample marking of the class to find out what are a representative number of students understanding and not understanding, so that then they can feed back to the class as a whole. Now, that significantly cuts back the number of books you're looking at, but in my opinion, and I'm not an expert in that, it gets you what you want, which is you want to know where the students are at, and then you can help them move forward. So from one respect, it's about looking at how we can change the strategies that we're using so everybody can do less. And then the other side of it is helping individuals to work in a way that's better. So, for example, when I was talking about everything needs doing, if the thing that gets in the way of us creating change is often our beliefs, and this is where the cognitive behaviour side of it is so powerful. So if, for example, you, throughout your career, the definition of success in your job has been getting everything done. But now you might be in a role where getting everything done doesn't define success in your role. So it's important to look at what does success in this role look like? It's the same with the marking strategy. If we implement a strategy to reduce marking, but say a particular teacher disagrees with the strategy and thinks the only way to do it is to look at each book and spend a long time on each book. Now, it could be that that teacher's circumstances allow them to do that. Perhaps they want to spend all evening marking, but that doesn't help the rest of the team. So it's about finding a strategy that works for everybody and then helping people so that the person who wants to do the perfect job of, I want to look at everything and mark everything and give everybody individualized feedback, the idea of, so what's effective here? What's the detriment to you, your life, your work of trying to do this perfect job? But then by looking at those beliefs and the thoughts behind driving the behaviour and then changing the behaviour as well as changing the system of marking, then you're kind of getting it from every angle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with that. But playing devil's advocate, does that then perhaps mean that there will be a race to the bottom in the fact that if you are maybe not banning, but if you're compelling somebody to maybe do less than they would naturally want to do, is there then extra stress put on that person because they feel like they're not prepared or it's just against their natural nature? Does there need to be some sort of flexibility in the system? And how do you sort of square that circle?
Now, I'm not sure that it's about the nature of the person. Because it could be so that that perfectionist element that drives that person to want to, say, for this example, mark all those books. Is that helpful in different areas? And it isn't all about one person. This is about trying to get, in the terms of marking, a system that works and is manageable for everybody. I've got no doubt if that person was trying to mark in a different way, that will be really uncomfortable. But I think that discomfort is okay, because that discomfort might lead to new behaviours, and then those new behaviours spread. So I think it's okay to ask people to do things that are uncomfortable. That's something I learned in cognitive behaviour theory and practice changed my life. I'm not exaggerating, it changed my life. And it changed, I was able to change bits that I thought, just as you've described, that's just how I am, that's just who I am. Well, then I discovered that it wasn't, it was learned behaviour that I could unlearn. And by giving that person a choice and the skills to do it differently, it might be that they eventually decide, no, it's really important to me to mark all of those books. But how can they make that decision unless they've tried it the other way and seen if it's effective?
And I think so much of that also applies to the students as well. Obviously, we're focusing on teachers tonight, but it very much does apply to students as well. So we had a comment coming in, which, to paraphrase, basically said that communication is often much of the problem with this. So do you think that there is sometimes a mismatch in the expectation of what we think others are requiring of us and what actually we think that we should be doing in the classroom?
Absolutely. I think it's not just the communication, it's the expectations of other people, but also the expectations of ourselves. I mean, how many times has someone said to you, you don't need to do this, but you think, oh, but I do really, they really want me to. So they tell you not to, you don't believe them, and you go ahead and do it. So some of it is about managing our own expectations, and then some of it is managing other people's expectations and being able to say, no, I can do that, but that means I can't do that other thing you asked me. So you need to make that choice because I can't do both of them. So I think that's often comes up as a coaching topic, and this idea that we imagine what other people are thinking, so we just guess what's in their head and think that that's fact. Really important again to collect evidence. What does that person actually think? What do they actually want me to do? And is it reasonable given everything else? Or do I need to have? In this instance, that's not possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that at one time or another, we're all guilty of this. I mean, I know I send emails at strange times sometimes, and I say in the title of the email the fact that this absolutely does not need to be done now. Do not do it, and then people still do it. And sometimes it's knowing the people that you're working with and actually, taking them at face value needs to be much more instilled. And I think that brings us nicely on to the idea of culture within schools and the fact that there needs to be some sort of culture across the entire school, which does have this sort of mentality built in. So it's not just the fact that one department has to respond immediately to an email and then another department can leave it to the next day. There needs to be some sort of agreement if colleagues are interacting from different parts of the school.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that expectations need to be very clear and then followed up on. I think. And those expectations also need to be agreed and reasonable. So if, for example, you're a teacher who's got 5 lessons a day and there's an email comes in at 7:45 that needs an action by 3:30, is that reasonable? And if that is the expectation, well, when is that going to be action? So it's going to be break, lunch, or while you're teaching. Now, why would you want anybody to take an action when they should either be resting and refreshing themselves, or when they should be interacting fully with the teachers? This idea of doing your emails while you're teaching, which I know people do as a way to survive, it seems too much of an ask to me, because you're not doing anything well. I've got quite strong views about this idea of multitasking. Because I just think you do everything less well. Now, that could be partly because my multitasking skills are so awful. So if I start doing something, like my sister will say to me, can you just finish it and then have the conversation with me? Don't try to do both together, because it's really frustrating for her as she's waiting for me to get my words out. So expectations are important. And limits are important. So things like another thing I feel strongly about is whole school emails. That's not something people should have access to be able to send those, because it's not helpful. I mean, everybody in every kind of job gets too many emails, the last thing they want to be doing is sifting through emails that don't refer to them, simply because it's easier to say send to all than looking up 4 people in a directory.
Absolutely.
I'm getting on my soapbox now, Martin.
No, that's absolutely fine. I was just going to say that we're getting a couple of comments in which are agreeing with you completely, so that's fantastic. You talk about limits. Should we feel like that we can put in our own limits and be able to communicate that to other people that we're working with, or is this something which we need to do internally? Is it something which we can put out there and let it be known to others that we do we have particular limits? So, for example, perhaps your weekend is sacred, or perhaps you have a particular night in the week where you absolutely will not do anything at home. Do you think that needs to be something which we can just impose ourselves, or is that something that we can put out there and sort of do it collaboratively with other colleagues?
I think the ideal would be that it's done collaboratively and there is a sense of agreement about what do we want the culture in this school to be. And if we want the culture to be that we arrive for the day ready to do a good job and not absolutely exhausted, then that's going to need a collective effort to put those boundaries in place. But then once those boundaries are in place, then people are going to need help kind of sticking to those boundaries themselves, even if it's done on a broad level, because people's drivers to keep working, especially in the teaching profession, are very, very strong. Now, the other side of that is organisations where the organisation won't put those boundaries in place, in which case, to me, it's really important that the individual does. Because if the individual doesn't, then who's going to protect that person and that protect that person's time? And that's where modelling comes in. It's so important. So, for example, my husband's also a teacher, and he was in a meeting with 2 members of staff, and someone knocked on the door and came in and started talking to them, and he said, can I just stop you there? I'm in a meeting. So then when the meeting carried on, and the people he was in a meeting with said, wow, that's never happened before. Because ordinarily they're used to just having to wait while this other conversation goes on. So by him modelling that behaviour, then next time those 2 people are in a meeting, they think, oh, well, he did that, so maybe I'm allowed to do that now. Same with emails, with saying no, managing people's expectations. It gives people permission, and it also helps them think about their own behaviour. Because you kind of see it as a reflection. Oh, well, I wouldn't dream of maybe saying no, but they've said no, so maybe I can try saying no this time.
Yes, the lost art of saying no, a very important skill which I've yet to master, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So my final question. So can I ask you perhaps what's on your to-do list at the moment, and also how do you keep your own to-do list to a minimum? Right. Now, the reason I'm laughing is because that question, because I knew the question was going to be coming up, and my immediate response was, oh, well, I better add some more to it so it looks... Now, the bonkers thing about that is that actually the thing at the top of my to-do list is to dial it down, because I'd got to the point, so I work for myself and I coach for the School Mental Health Award and I work for the civil service. So I'm juggling lots of different things. And it got to the point that work was growing and I didn't notice that the work was growing. And you can tell, so then I was talking to my sister, I'd met her for swimming. And you can tell how recently it is because we've only just been allowed back in the pool, haven't we? Yeah.
And she said, well, have you logged how much work you're doing? And the daft thing was that this is something that I talk about with coachees in coaching sessions. So anyway, I couldn't see the wood for the trees. I logged how much I was doing. I was doing far too much. So I started dialing it back. So then in dialing it back, when I came to write this list, my initial response was just, well, I can't just say that. I need to add some more. So that's the top of my list, dialing it back. Do you want to know about my list or how I keep my list smaller?
Yes, please. That'd be fantastic.
That bit. Okay. Now this is a bit of a tale. So I love lists / I'm obsessed with lists. And when anybody's figuring out how to manage their own lists, it's not something, so nobody's going to be able to listen to this, take my strategy and transplant it into their own work and life. So I figured out what works for me with a coach, then I tweaked it, and I've got to keep tweaking it because work and life moves all the time. So nobody can tell you what's going to work for you, which is why a coach is so important. And that's not a sales pitch. That's just my belief about it's much easier to process your thoughts out loud with someone asking you the right questions. So this is my process. I can't say all of it with a straight face because some of it sounds, when I was saying it out loud, right. Mm-hmm. So I have what I call, I'm not kidding here, I call it the master list. So on the master list is everything I want to do. But of course, the master list is far too big, and that's not something that you could function with on a day-to-day basis. So what I do is I have a half-term plan. And I do that half-term plan. At the end of one half-term, I do a review and I plan the next half-term. But I don't just plan the work I'm going to do. I plan how I'm going to work. So it's it's a self-coaching session. So what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. Now, the other issue, and this is for me, is that I'm prone to overthinking and over-planning. So if I don't put limits on it, I could quite easily spend 2 days planning a half-term, trying to get it all right. So to temper that, I found a strategy called, and well, I call it this because this is the name of the blog, the uncertainty of what you should be working on right now. So the guy who wrote it plays the Chinese game Go, and it was based on on lessons he'd learned from Go. And the first 2 lessons were keep the whole board in mind and play one stone at a time. So the first thing I'm doing when I've got my master list and I'm thinking about the next half term is I think, what does the whole board require me to do now? So there'll be lots of things I might want to do, but what does the whole picture require me to do? So then when I've made that decision, and I've also got to bear in mind that you can't be certain about what that decision is. And the blog talks really articulately about this. So the next step is to play one stone at a time. So no matter, you might want today, for example, there might be 3 things I want to do, but I can't do 3 things. I can only do 1 thing. So when I'm looking at my half term, I think, what does the whole board need me to do right now? And what are the stones that I can play, even though I want to play lots of them? And I still might not be certain, but I've got to make a decision. So once I've got those things, guess what I do? Then I put them on a list. So then I've got my half-term list. So then on a weekly basis, I schedule time and I plot out my week so I'm covering my priorities. And then within the week, of course, there are all those priorities that include doing the job. So for me, that's coaching, leading sessions, meeting people to plan. And for teachers, that's going to be lessons, line management meetings. So all that counts, even though nobody would put on their to-do list, I'm guessing, teach class, tick it off, have line management meeting, tick it off. It's just in your timetable and you do it, but you're still doing things. Mm-hmm. So when I'm plotting my week out the week before, I've then also got to be flexible. And I've really had to learn to do this in working for myself. And when you're timetabled in school, when I moved away from that timetable, I wasn't able immediately to be flexible. But if somebody, for whatever reason, needs to remove an appointment and change it or put a session in, then I've got to be able to adapt to that. So then the last step is, when I've done that, I've then got a checklist. And on this checklist is the bit about looking after myself. So have I got breaks in the day? So actually the breaks in the day I do at the beginning of the day. I make sure I've slotted them in. Have I got exercising every day? Have I got recreation time? And this term recreation time it's a new phrase I've been using because when I got to the point where I'd overwhelmed myself, I was talking to my coaching supervisor about it. And he introduced me to this word recreation and said, could I think of it in the terms of recreation, recreating Vanessa and putting time in every day to recreate Vanessa. So I make sure I do that. So that's how I do it. Master list, half-term list, weekly plan, checklist. This has taken many years of refining, and it has to be refined all the time because things change.
That's absolutely fantastic.
Does that answer your question?
It certainly does. I wasn't expecting anywhere near a cascading number of lists. That was just incredible. Thank you for that. That's excellent. So I presume you've got lots of information on your website. Can you just remind everybody where they can find you online?
Yep, it's rightcoach, rightcoach.co.uk. Of course, I'm on Twitter at Vanessa Weirs, and my contact details are on my website and, of course, on Twitter.
Yep, so the Twitter handle is on the screen now. And as I said at the beginning of this webinar, all of the things we've been talking about should be in the show notes wherever you're watching this. And a couple of things just before we wrap up. First of all, the irony of talking about workload on a school night hasn't been lost on us. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. Just to let you know that if you're interested in taking part in one of these webinars or hosting a UKEdChat on Twitter, then just get in touch. Loads of different ways you can do that on our website, UKEdChat.com, or on Twitter, UKEdChat. And otherwise, that is about it. So, Vanessa, thank you ever so much for taking part this evening. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you ever so much for having me.
That's no problem at all. And thank you for everybody else for watching. And we'll see you another time. Goodbye.
Thank you.